Dr. Thum, if you haven't found that document, doesn't matter. We will carry on. Listen to the question again. Now, Dr. Thum, I'm not asking you about broader points yet. I'm referring to an answer you gave. And by reference to that answer, I'm asking you a question. So please understand that.
Yes.
Your initial answer, and it may have been mistaken, was that those two sentences I pointed you to were inconsistent with each other. Now that you have read it again a few times, would you agree that there is no inconsistency on the face of it?
I disagree.
Okay, so you say on the face of it there is inconsistency.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me what is inconsistent on the face of it, without reference to anything else.
If he, as Secretary General of the Malayan Communist Party, does not know facts and figures of his own organization, how would he know how people not in his organization could possibly think?
Can I suggest, Dr. Thum, if that's the best you can say, it's very poor. And I'll explain to you why. I think you are struggling very hard to try and come up with explanations, I'm sorry to say this, which simply don't wash. And let me explain. It would be extremely astonishing if he could put a number, a figure, a number of people whom they controlled among the voting public because of the nature of the organization. But he can make the statement, which is slightly more general, that members of the unions appreciated they were under the control of the CPM. Because they were controlling the CPM, the CPM was controlling the unions, and they had their members in there. And the way it worked, he knew that the members knew they were under the control of the CPM. I don't see any contradiction at all to that.
No, that doesn't make any sense, I'm sorry.
That doesn't make any sense. And
your statement does not make any sense.
so you say these two statements are inconsistent.
Yes, I maintain
Have
that.
you said that anywhere before, that these two statements are inconsistent?
I don't think so, no.
No. Is this the first time this is striking you, that these two statements are inconsistent?
This is the first time anyone has asked me in public about these two statements. But
That-
no, this page I have read before and I have looked at for my work.
Right. Now, are you able to say that this statement, members of these unions well appreciated they were under the control of CPM, when Chin Ping says that, that is inaccurate?
Well, his statement is that he can certainly say that members of these unions well appreciated they were under the control of the CPM. I believe that to be inaccurate, yes.
You believe that to be?
Inaccurate.
Inaccurate.
Yes.
And your reasons for saying that you believe that what Chin Ping is saying is inaccurate?
Well, we come back. Can I bring in the broader context now?
We'll come back to that later, but in your view, it's inaccurate. But you will tell us whether you have referred to his statements in this context in any public statement of yours, correct? Whether you have referred to his statements in any published journal or any of the journals that are referred to in the bibliography, presumably you haven't, correct?
Not to this statement, no.
Thank you. Now, if his statements are correct, if, that's a big if, and let's accept that you disagree with him, but if his statements are correct, then the left-wing trade unions who are part of the progressive left, as you call them, your statement that there's no evidence of communist influence in them, your statement would be inaccurate if his statement is accurate, correct? The two are directly contradictory.
If his statement is correct, it would overturn decades of historical consensus. So,
Right.
yes, I accept what you're saying.
Now, historical consensus, that's a big phrase. From what I can see, there is historical consensus the other way up to recently. Now, let's look at page 7 of the ARI paper. You say, looking at the third and fourth paragraphs, the basis of the PAP's victory in 1959 was the progressive left and the trade unions, correct? The very last sentence, organizational basis for PAP election victory in 1959.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, go back to what Thum Ping says. Then, the victory in 1959 was really because the CPM was directing the trade unions and the so-called progressive left, correct?
Thum Ping's wrong.
I understand, but if he is right, then you are wrong, correct? I mean,
Can you
your
clarify
statement
that
directly
statement?
contradicts. Your statement directly contradicts
no, that
him.
statement does not also say that they were in direct control. It says, if I remember, sorry, maybe you want to bring it up, members well appreciated that they were under the control, which is a slightly different thing.
Let's look at that sentence and the sentence after that. Our supporters, sympathizers, and fellow travelers went on to provide Lee's grassroots electoral support. Our supporters, that's the communist supporters, communist sympathizers, and fellow travelers went on to provide Lee's grassroots electoral support. Without them, he would have never achieved his stunning 43-seat victory in the 51 constituencies. I think you're smart enough to know what I'm asking. His statement directly contradicts your statement. Agree or disagree?
May I elaborate?
You can first disagree and then elaborate.
Okay, I disagree. Right.
Thank you.
Now, there are a number of nuances here which one must appreciate, right? First of all, when analyzing a source, of course, we have to look at it from the source's perspective. And understand that they also are working with limited knowledge, right? And another, for example, issue with a source might be that they're writing this 50 years later, and there's no citation for
Let me just get a clarification before you go on.
Yes.
Are all these things what you have analyzed before, or these are things that you're telling me now?
No, these are things I've analyzed before.
Is it published anywhere other than your PhD thesis?
I think I've argued this in several of my articles. Wait, published, when you say
about
it, what is it?
Thum Ping specifically, that why he cannot be relied upon when he says all of this.
I have not published an article explaining why Thum Ping is an unreliable witness, if that's what you mean.
Have you applied your mind and given these reasons that you're going to give now, specific to this statements of Thum Ping at any place previously?
Well, this statement, which says, which statement? Our supporters, sympathizers, and fellow travelers were going to provide Lee's grassroots electoral support?
Yes.
That statement has been cited and I have interrogated that and explained the nuances of that statement.
Right. Where have you
So-
cited it?
Oh boy. May I have some time to check through my
Okay,
published
you will
doc-
come back to us with that.
Oh, okay, add it to
Yes.
the list.
Now,
Yes, so, sorry, can I check, what page number is this?
page 409, Chin Ping. So the question was, have you ever stated what you are now saying about this source in
Okay,
public?
I want to be clear, right? I said that statement has been published elsewhere, right? It has been cited elsewhere.
That statement has
Yes.
been cited elsewhere.
Yes, and I said I interrogated other people's use of that statement.
Oh,
so I'm not
sorry.
saying
I'm asking you, the question I'm asking you is
Right.
different.
Okay.
I'm asking you whether you have referred to this statement and critiqued it and analyzed it in any published work.
No, I don't think so, no.
Thank you. Now, in
Would you
which
still like
case-
me to critique the statement?
Not really, because the question in my mind was, have you done it before?
I have, what's that law of properties? I have critiqued other people's use of that statement. Does
Right.
that count?
Well, you can give to us what you have critiqued about other people's use, and we will look at it.
So you don't want me to answer that right now?
We'll
You want
come
me
back to that, maybe. We'll take a record and we can look through
Right.
in terms of the time we have. Now, Chin Ping then goes on to say, in our review of the Singapore election results, the Central Committee rightly predicted that the victorious Lee would one day move against the CPM to consolidate his power. We appraised our cadres accordingly, but could do little more. Is that something that you agree with?
There's no evidence for this. He just says it.
Right.
He can say anything he wants. I can't tell unless he has a citation.
Have you critiqued it before?
Well, there's no point critiquing something that is unprovable. How am I supposed to critique that?
Right. Now, maybe since I'm going to move on to a different point, you can tell me what you have said about other people citing that earlier sentence. Maybe in summary. Yeah.
Okay. So this sentence and other examples like it is often used to show the existence of a communist conspiracy, right? But I point out that there is no evidence of a communist conspiracy. There's no evidence that the detainees of Operation Cold Store were involved in any communist conspiracy. That this is a very broad-ranging sentence. Our
Dr. Thum,
supporters,
just in case,
sympathizers,
Dr.
and fellow-
Thum,
yes.
just in case you didn't understand the question, for the time being, I'm not getting into Operation Cold Store. I'm simply talking about whether you have specifically critiqued other people citing this particular sentence and whether you have given your views, your own views,
Yes,
on that critique of this sentence.
I have given my views, and I
On
thought you were
that
asking me to give
critique-
those views right now.
On the critique of
Yes.
this sentence, not anything beyond it.
I was getting to that.
Yes,
Right. First,
then
you need
please
to
get
set
to
the
that.
sentence in context.
Yes.
Right, and understand the context in which the sentence is being said and understood. Right. So you need to understand the issues surrounding the source. So to get to the sentence itself, for example, as I mentioned, right, it's used as to show that there was some sort of widespread communist conspiracy. I have pointed out there is no evidence. Our supporters, sympathizers, and fellow travelers also does not mean that any of these people were actually Communist Party members, as he's made clear elsewhere, as Yu Choi Yip did say, I was the only cadre left. As Chin Ping said, the organization had been smashed, we had no contact. It is entirely possible that, and very likely, that many people in Singapore were supporters in the sense of, I believe in the Communist Party of Malaya because they were the leading anti-colonial force. They had they were the main source of resistance against the Japanese in World War II. So to support the Malayan Communist Party was entirely possible and not illegal, right? The Malayan Communist Party itself was an illegal organization, but it was not illegal to believe in communism, nor was it illegal to express, there was no thought police, right? Mentally, you could support the Malayan Communist Party. Likewise, sympathizers, I can sympathize with someone without being a member, without being part of a conspiracy. Fellow travelers is very, very broad. Anyone, in this definition, anyone who is against British colonialism, according to special branch as well, is classified as a fellow traveler. And thus that includes, for example, the People's Action Party. It includes the parties on the right, the conservative parties, the Liberal Socialist Party. So that's the broader context of the sentence. Okay. So it shows a wide level of support for anti-colonialism. It doesn't show a comprehensive underground communist conspiracy. And that's the point I make.
Well, don't you think all of that falls flat if you look at one of the earlier sentences? I can certainly say that most of the island's workers sympathized with the left-wing trade unions, and members of these unions well appreciated they were under the control of the CPM. We looked at that sentence. I don't need an answer from you now. You have disagreed with that sentence. We leave that on the record. But I just suggest to you that your answer is contradicted, all your extended analysis, if Chin Ping is right in that sentence. But in your view, he is wrong. So let's move on.
Well, he's wrong because the special branch has no evidence.
Right.
Yes.
Because special branch has no evidence, that is the reason why he is wrong?
Well, may I get into the wider context?
No, you keep throwing new things. You didn't say it just now.
I did. I started talking about the wider context, and you said, no, I'm just talking about this page.
I know that you're very keen. I'm just telling you that if this sentence that I just read out is correct, which you disagree with, then all these other wider context that you've just told us is not accurate. But if you want to explain that, we'll try and come back to it. Now, let's look at Lee Tung Hui. You're aware of
yes,
him?
Lee Tung Hui, yes. 1996. His book was published in
1996. Cast your eye over this. I don't know whether they're able to put it up. Page 84. In May 1955, let me read out to you while they're putting it up. You have read this book, by the way?
Yes, it's cited in my RE
Thank you.
Paper.
Yes. In May 1955, other than the troubles in the Hockley Bus Company, there were disputes between employees and employers in other places. And then he talks about them. And he says, in the end, a number of persons involved in the sympathy strikes totaled 20,000 because of the Singapore Bus Workers Union. After the Battle of Hockley had been successfully concluded, the communists followed up with a plan to bring out more than 100,000 persons in sympathy strikes. To realize this, they aimed to make use of the conflict then going on at the Singapore Harbour Board, and he talks about that. 140,000 of the 300,000 labor force were unionized. He talks about them being English-speaking, and that particular union was controlled and influenced by the PAP non-communists. And he talks about the quarrel. And over the page, he talks about the SFS Workers' Union, headed by Chin Seong, announcing that they will go on strike and what it would have done. And in the last paragraph at page 85, what the SFSU managed to do 16,000 persons stopped work, but the communists put the number at 60 or 70,000. Communists declared that the strike would go on until the detained persons were released or brought to trial, and then what Marshall announced. I assume that you disagree that this was, whenever Mr. Lee refers to, Lee Ting-hui refers to the communists, you disagree with that, correct?
Yes, he applies the term very loosely.
Right. Now, would you accept that they were communist inspired?
The strikes?
Yes.
No,
Remember
they
your
were
answer.
inspired by genuine grievances on the part of
I
the
didn't
workers.
ask that question. I know you're very keen to answer questions which I haven't asked. I asked you a question that is capable of an answer. Would you agree that they were communist inspired? And let me remind you of your earlier answer, and I took you through the flourishing movements and strikes and so on, which you were good enough to agree. Let me remind you of that answer on oath and ask you this question. Would you agree that these were communist inspired?
On oath? No.
Thank you. You don't see a contradiction between this particular answer and your earlier answer when I
No.
referred you to what Fang
No.
Chuanpi said?
No.
Would you like to explain?
Yes.
Thank you.
Very much. So in the mid-1950s, what we see in Singapore is a widely diverse spectrum of anti-colonial activity, right? And these range very much from the Fabian socialists on the sort of, well, actually anti-colonial activity extended to the right. And we have very Fabian socialists in the sort of center-left, all the way to a wide range of radicals, anarchists. This is a period where there is a wide variety of ideas that are infecting people and about how to proceed. Now, the communists were one of this, and that people believed in communism in Singapore is that, you know, that's no doubt about that. But again, my argument is that there is no evidence of a underground, you know, after 1953-54, and particularly in the late 50s and into the early 60s of Operation Cold Store, there's no evidence of a sustained
We haven't got into Operation
underground
Cold Store yet.
communist.
We are dealing with 1950s.
Yes.
So you
I'm just
restrict your
saying.
answer to
I'm just saying.
1950s.
You're talking. You're asking whether the strikes were communist inspired.
Yes.
I'm saying that this is a colonial. Okay. So the reason why the strikes happened.
No, and then you're explaining.
Yes. So
Yes.
yes. So the reasons why the strike happened is because this is a colonial economy with fundamental inequalities, right? This is a time period where there were very few labor protections for the workers.
Okay, I
and
don't
the
need
workers
all
had
that.
genuine
Can I
grievances.
stop you there?
Yes.
I think you have explained that they were not communist inspired, and you have given some reasons.
Yes.
We'll have that on the record. Now, so let's go back to what Fang Chong-pik had said and your answer earlier. This is tab 10A, page 122. It will come on. We read this sentence a few times. Over the years, the spectacular mass movements were in the main led by the basic level cadres of the student committee of the CPM. Now, I asked you about the spectacular mass movements, and you were good enough to agree that that included the various strikes in those periods. So I ask you again, would you now agree that based on your earlier answer, by reference to this particular passage from Fang Chong-pik, the strikes that we have just referred to in this book, Mr. Lee's book, Lee Teng-hui's book, were communist-inspired, led by the basic level cadres of the student committee. Agree? Disagree?
Disagree.
Thank you. Can I suggest to you that your answers are inconsistent and you can agree or disagree?
I disagree.
Thank you.
My answers are consistent.
Thank you. Now, you are aware that in 1961, Xi Jinping met with Deng Xiaoping, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think
yes.
doesn't count as
Yes.
And Deng told him about the armed struggle in Burma, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Indonesia, and Vietnam, correct?
Well, I'm not familiar with the exact content of what they said, but I assume they must have discussed communist struggle, yes.
Are you aware of any writings on this matter?
I am aware that there are writings.
Thank you. Can you mention one?
No,
You can't recall any.
not off the top of my head right now, no.
Thank you. Now, in 1959, the CPM had decided to give up armed struggle. You are aware of that.
Yeah, yes.
In 1961, at China's request, they agreed to reverse that decision and start armed struggle again. You are aware of that?
Yes.
Thank you. Just give me a few minutes. I will. You will have to bear with me reading this because we don't have it on the screen. Page 430 of Jinping. I'll read it out to you. Deng, this I'm reading from page 428. Okay. Deng opened the deliberations. This is the meeting in 1961 between Jinping and Deng Xiaoping. Southeast Asia, he informed us, was about to undergo monumental changes. We knew he was fresh from discussions with Ho Chi Minh. What he was telling us, I surmised, was based on his knowledge of Hanoi's intentions towards South Vietnam. Deng knew the minds and plans of the Burmese, Siamese, Lao, Cambodian, and Indonesian comrades who all maintained important training facilities in China at this time. Strategically, the whole region, Deng insisted, would become ripe for the sort of struggle we had been pursuing in Malaya for so long. CPM must not, he urged, switch policies at this point. We must take advantage of the opportunities that would soon be presenting themselves throughout Southeast Asia. I was momentarily taken aback. I can't decide this matter on the spot, I told the Chinese leader. This question must be determined by our Central Committee. Gathering my thoughts, I hastily added, if we were to revert back to armed struggle, what sort of assistance might we expect from China? And then the question of money came up. And he then says, psychologically, we now found ourselves in an even tougher position. In Sadao, we had suffered months of mental torment before finally coming to the conclusion that our one remaining hope of survival lay in the return to political struggle, despite the immediate pain this might mean. In private, I went over every detail of Deng's argument. For these deliberations, I brought in Xiao Chang, Chen Tian, Li Tung, and he talks about it. He talks about Deng having been very persuasive, a little bit awkward about talking about money. Then he goes on at page 433. And he says, ironically, it was Musa Ahmad, the man we had elevated to the party chairmanship before Baling, who would ultimately betray us, who proved the most optimistic of all when it came to discussing Deng's proposal. With China's backing, we can take over Malaya in 5 years, he confidently predicted. I suggested an 8 to 10 year time frame might be more realistic, but I still harbored some doubts. Then he talked about some concerns, his lack of confidence that something might happen in Siam. And then at 434, he talks about going back to the Chinese and negotiations. And essentially, you must be aware that the Chinese agreed to finance the restart of armed struggle. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Very successfully too, I guess, since Malaya was taken over by the Communist Party in 5 years. Oh no, wait, they weren't, were they? I'm sorry, my mistake.
Yes, I know that you can't resist some jokes now and then.
Life is short.
If I could add, the reason why they didn't succeed was because of Operation Cold Store. And perhaps that might...
Singapore isn't mentioned in there, remember?
Yes.
The Malayan Communist Party did not have a significant presence below the causeway,
that
on our side of the causeway.
When CPM, when they refer to Malaya, are you disagreeing that they refer to Malaya and Singapore together?
No, they're referring to Malaya. Malaya refers to the entire peninsula, yes. But we've also established, through Jinping's own words, that they had no significant presence in Singapore.
No, we didn't establish that. But
well, it was on the screen earlier.
Let me ask you. So your point is, whenever these statements are made, they're only by reference to Peninsula Malaya and not by reference to Singapore?
Jinping...
now I'm asking you a yes or no question.
Well,
and then
those statements that you just read out.
They are not by reference to Singapore.
That's impossible to say. I don't know what Jinping actually means.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we should take that as the answer and not your earlier answer that that's not a reference to Singapore. Well,
my earlier answer was that the MCP, as established in what Jinping said earlier, did not have a significant presence in Singapore.
They had
he said specific. He used the word smashed, or was that you, Troy? Someone used the word smashed.
He also said, and have others, which were good enough to agree, including Fang Chuanpi, that they had spectacular successes in organizing
the anti-colonial movement had spectacular successes.
Spectacular successes organized through their cadres in the Students' Committee of the CPM.
No, led in the main by the low-level cadres of the Student Committee. Please,
of the CPM.
Yes,
thank you.
We accept that. Yes, led by the student cadres, not organized by the student cadres, not organized by the student committee. Led in the main by. No, I just want to be precise. That's the sentence. Let's just stick with what exactly he wrote.
By saying that you want to be precise, we all can see what you're trying to do. You are trying to create a picture which is untrue. The fact is, when you are confronted with the direct statements, you have no choice but to agree. And Fang Chuanpi has said there was...
I have disagreed.
No, you didn't disagree with Fang Chuanpi. You disagreed with somebody else.
Which statement? You're not giving me much room. You're just asking yes/no questions in a field which is all about
Dr. Thum, at this stage, I'm not asking you a question. I'm just telling you something. The transcript will be available. If I'm wrong, you will be able to say I'm wrong. But I'm just telling you that you had agreed with the statement by Fang Chuanpi about the success of the work of the Student Committee of the CPM in Singapore. Now, let's just take it from there, and we don't need to split hairs. They were having success.
Is the transcript available right now, or only after this?
Well, the transcript, we can scroll back later on.
Okay.
But having agreed with that, now we are talking about Chinese funding of the CPM. You are good enough to agree that, well, you can't tell whether, that covers Peninsula Malaya only or whether it covers Peninsula Malaya and Singapore. So let's take it at that level. And
The Federation of Malaya, Peninsular Malaya already includes Singapore.
thank you.
Federation of Malaya and Singapore.
So thank you for that clarification. And so, may I suggest that your earlier attempt at a joke was inaccurate because, for the simple reason that the money from China was going to be used in their mind for armed struggle in Peninsular Malaya and Singapore, because they looked at it as one entity. And the only reason, and you don't have to agree, I'm just telling you, only reason it didn't succeed, one of the reasons it didn't succeed was Operation Cold Store. But I know you disagree, but since you make an attempt at a joke, I think I should say that to you. Now, you are aware that Jinping discussed with Yu Chuyip in Beijing in 1961 about Singapore. Are you aware of that?
Yes?
Thank you. The discussion centered on how to protect the communist underground activists in Singapore, correct?
Yes, yeah.
And how to preserve the communist underground in Singapore, correct?
Yes?
And they feared a crackdown, correct?
Yes, you're asking me for specific details now.
No, I'm just asking you
if I'm
whether
aware
you
of this.
agree. They feared a crackdown.
Well, I would.
Communists.
You're asking. I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head every single thing that is, that they are recorded.
Well, these
to
are
have
all
discussed.
major developments.
Mhm.
I'm simply asking you, as a person who says that you are done detailed research in this area,
Mhm.
whether you're aware that Jinping and Yu Chuyip were fearing a crackdown on the communist underground in Singapore when they
Yes, of
discussed.
course.
Thank
They
you.
had been cracked down. There have been lots of crackdowns,
Yes.
constant crackdowns.
And they planned to sabotage the Malaysia Plan and to keep Singapore separate.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
That's an interesting question. I can't remember that statement off the top of my head. So if you have a source for that, I'd appreciate seeing
Right.
it. Yeah.
So sitting there as a historian who has done detailed work in this area,
Mhm.
you do not, off the top of your head, remember anything that suggests that Yu Chuyip and Jinping discussed and agreed to plan to sabotage the Malaysia Plan.
No, not off the top of my head. But I would be very grateful for the opportunity for you to refresh my memory.
All right. Let's look at what Jinping says. Page 436 and 437. If you see at the bottom, senior Singapore communist leader Yu Chuyip, as we called him, traveled to China from his headquarters in exile in Riau Islands shortly after the arrival in Peking. Now, over the page, let's look at the third paragraph. I think the second paragraph. Our Peking meeting also examined in detail the Malaysia Plan that was being hatched between London and Kuala Lumpur. The three of us came to the conclusion that it would be in the best interest of our party, the Communist Party, if we plotted to sabotage this. So does that help you remember?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. It's quite surprising that something as important as this has escaped your memory.
Well, nobody's perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't for a minute suggest that you are completely perfect, but I expected you to be more perfect than most of us in this field.
More perfect than most. Okay, well,
In this field.
thank you. You have a very high opinion of me, and so I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the reason for the high opinion is that you said that you are someone who has done detailed research and work in this field. And I would have thought a plan by the Communist Party of Malaya to sabotage the Malaysia Plan would have been something very significant that a historian will remember, but we will take it that you don't, and we will move on.
And I just point out there are no citations on that page either.
Thank you. You expect them to keep a record and then for Chin Ping to say, refer to the minutes of meeting held on X date, X month in 1961 between Yu Chuyup and myself, and here are the notes. Do you expect that?
No, but the special branch did keep a record, and so that's the
This was
citations
taking
that
place
I
in
used.
Peking, and as far
Yes.
as I know, in 1961, the special branch wasn't that active in
No,
Peking.
I'm not saying special branch was at that meeting. I'm saying that there is no evidence, for example, that the detainees of Operation
Well, we'll come
Coldstone
to
were
that.
involved.
I'm now
so
talking
evidence,
about-
right? We are driven by evidence. Chin Ping is one source. He says something. We take it into account in our broader
Right.
consideration of all the sources. But it really helps if you have evidence for what you're saying.
Dr. Thum, for the
And-
time
yes.
being, we are talking about the plan that was hatched, and I think we have evidence from the Secretary General of CPM, and I think for the time being, it's enough to note that you don't recall it. Now, can I take it that you haven't interrogated this particular point either, in the way that you talked about earlier?
You can take it that I consider Chin Ping an unreliable source.
Thank you. Now, so you will discount pretty much everything that he says?
No, I didn't say that. I said
No, unreliable
I take-
source.
Unreliable source doesn't mean he's totally wrong.
Right. So
right?
you would apply
it
your
means
mind
that
to...
you have to take him in consideration with all the other sources,
Right.
including special branch documents, for
So the
example.
question I asked you is, can I take it that you haven't interrogated this particular sentence and point? I mean, you didn't even remember it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Thank
you can
you.
take that, yes.
Now, do you know that Chin Ping decided to get the Singapore Underground to work on splitting the PAP? Are you aware of that?
Do I know when Chin Ping decided
No.
to? Sorry, I didn't get the
Whether
question.
he decided to get the Singapore communists underground to work on splitting the PAP.
I know that Chin Ping made a lot of decisions that had very little impact on Singapore.
That wasn't the question I asked, so I'll try again.
Please do.
Do you know whether Chin Ping decided to get the Singapore communist underground to work on splitting the PAP? Yes or no? I'm asking whether you know.
I think that, let me think. I can't recall off the top of my head.
You can't recall.
Yes, I can't recall.
It's not an important enough fact in your mind.
Chin Ping is not a major player in Singapore because the MCP does not have a major presence in Singapore during this time.
You
It's
didn't
more
even know
important.
that the cadres from Malaya had come down to Singapore. So, you keep making these statements. Chin Ping's...
Well, are we going to cite anything from the ISD, from Special Branch? Because a lot of my work is based on their sources, right, and their reports. And there, I do not recall
Let's-
anything in their documents saying that, these 10 people out of over 1 million in Singapore had a major impact,
All right.
right?
No, I think the major impact we have dealt with and crossed the bridge, unless you want to recross again and say that what you said earlier was not true. So let's not go back to that.
We didn't connect those 10 people with the broader mass
No,
movements.
I
We
wa- I
simply
wasn't-
accepted that 10 people came to
I
Singapore
didn't seek to
according
connect
to
those
Chin
10
Ping.
people. The
Okay,
10
great.
people,
Thank you.
the point on the 10 people
Yes.
was the fact that you didn't even know that happened. And you didn't even, register that. That's the only point. So it's not being suggested that there are only 10 communists in Singapore,
No.
that they all came from Peninsular Malaya. If Chin Ping is right, the communists had an underground movement in Singapore. They infiltrated many organizations. They worked with the PAP. And the CPM worked on splitting the PAP. Would you agree that if he is right, all of those things are correct too? I mean, based on what he says.
If he is right,
Thank you.
if
But you disagree with him on each of those points.
Okay, which points exactly now?
Okay.
Right.
You disagree with him that the communists had an underground movement in Singapore?
Wait, are we going to go through the yes-no thing again, or can I nuance my answer?
Well, we are going to start with a yes and no, and then you can give an explanation.
Okay. The communists did not have a sustained underground conspiracy in Singapore in
I didn't
the
ask
late
that.
50s.
I asked you whether the communists had an underground movement in Singapore. Do you agree with Chin Ping when he says that? You can say no.
Okay, no.
Thank you. So the communists did not have an underground movement in Singapore. That's your evidence as a historian sitting here.
Okay,
Right?
I need to clarify,
No,
to
you can-
nuance the answer, right? Because these are
Dr.
very
Thum,
complicated
Dr. Thum.
terms.
It's actually very simple.
No, it's not.
The question is, did they have an underground movement in Singapore? Whether
Again,
it is
we
strong,
come back to
whether-
my initial question, way
Let
back
me
when
finish,
we started.
please.
Define the movement.
I'm just going to put it that way, and I'm going to leave it to you to say yes or no, or you can say, I don't know how to answer the question. The question is, the communists had an underground movement. You can say yes, you can say no, you can say I don't know, and then you can explain.
Okay, then my answer is no.
Thank you. Now, would you agree? So,
Do I get to explain? You
yes,
said I could explain.
of course.
Yes, of course. Well, so it really depends, as I said, on how you define movement, and this is very complicated. According to special branch records, there was no sustained communist underground conspiracy after 53, 54 or so, because it had been heavily smashed. Chin Ping himself agrees with that the Singapore Town Committee was heavily smashed. So in the sense that there is, if you're thinking about as an underground movement of people, conspirators connecting with each other, no, that does not exist. Are there individual communists? Yes. Are there people who believe in communism? Yes.
Dr. Thum, you have said all of these things several times.
Yes.
This is your explanation. We don't need to go into it.
Okay.
We went through this exchange, and I suggested to you that your answers were inconsistent with what you had given a little bit earlier, and we can leave it at that.
And respectfully, I disagreed with you.
I know.
Yes.
Right. The record will speak for itself.
Yes, it will. The
Now-
truth will always come out.
The Can I refer you to something that Aloysius Chin has said, which I'm sure you're aware of, page 72. I don't know that we have it on the transcript, but we will try and have it out. Aloysius Chin, the Communist Party of Malaya. In the interest of time, let me read it out to you. Okay. The object, this is from the bottom of page 72, the object of the CUF, Communist United Front in Peninsular Malaya, was defined in a secret CPM directive which stated the progressive forces should formulate plans and make arrangements to assign cadres and party members to infiltrate factories, mines, villages, streets, schools, and people of all strata, use all kinds of ways and means to unite and organize the broad masses, and assign personnel to join all kinds of public bodies, take part in them with the aim of seizing control so that the party and the people will have extensive contact, and therein press on with the efforts to recruit party members and continually expand party organization. The leading organs of progressive forces from the highest to the lowest should mix cleverly with central parties and factions, adopt various ways and means to initiate joint action and form a united front with them on matters of common interest. Furthermore, they should endeavor to join up with the commercial, cultural, and student circles in waging a common struggle so as to form a powerful force to fight the reactionaries on these issues and therein to strive to win over the people. Are you aware of this secret CPM directive?
It's not very secret.
So you are aware
I'm
of the
aware,
directive?
I'm aware. Yes, yes.
Right. Now, that was their plan for Peninsular Malaya and Singapore. Agree?
Yes.
And that was certainly referring to the period after 1952.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, I want you to look at some things that have been said about the anti-British League, which we talked about very much earlier in your evidence.
Yes.
Let's look at Wong Sun Fong. Does his name strike a bell for you?
Are you referring to the former secretary, not secretary, the Wong Sun Fong? The name definitely rings a bell. Let me look him up.
A member of ABL and a member of the Communist Party of Malaya. Does that help you?
That describes a lot of people, but sure, go on. Yes.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Yeah.
Now, he was in ABL in 1953-54 and became a member of the Communist Party of Malaya in 1957. And he was part of the PAP, elected into the Legislative Assembly as a PAP candidate in
Yes.
1959.
Yes.
He was one of the 13 who left the PAP in 1961 to form the Barisan Socialists.
Yes.
Are you aware of that?
Yes, yes.
And he escaped arrest in 1963.
Yes.
He fled Singapore to go over to Indonesia
Yes.
and later joined the CPM underground.
Does your record reflect what Yu Choi Yip said to him when he arrived in Riyadh?
Well, I'm just putting this to you. You can agree, disagree, and then if you wish, if you think the answer needs an explanation, you can suggest. So I'm just asking you whether you're aware that he fled to Indonesia and joined the CPM underground.
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you. And he ended up in the Peace Village in Betong, reserved for former CPM members, correct?
Yes, yes. I think he's in the documentary To Singapore with Love.
Now, this is what he says, the memoirs of Wong Sun Fong. Are you aware of these memoirs?
Yes.
You have read them?
Yes.
Thank you. He says, in the 1950s, the underground organization in Singapore was Anti-British League. This was an anti-colonial progressive organization that we had access to. Do you agree with that statement?
The Anti-British League was an underground anti-colonial organization. Oh, it's there.
That we had access to.
Yes.
You agree with that? Have you heard of Chong Hua?
Sorry, that's I'm not sure.
Former Malayan ABL member. Doesn't strike a bell?
Doesn't strike a bell, no.
Thank you. Chong Hua says, in the book Preliminary Study of the History of Singapore People's Anti-British League, and I quote, it's in Chinese. I assume you haven't read this, right?
No, not Zhong Hua's book, yes.
It was generally believed that as a peripheral underground organization led by the CPM Singapore Committee lead agency, its objective and aim should be to win over and organize people from all sectors of Singapore under the leadership of CPM to enlarge the anti-British United Front in coordination with the development of the armed struggle in the mainland to overthrow the British colonial rule of Malaya and to establish the People's Republic of Malaya, but not to strive for the eventual realization of a communist socialist society. That is to say, members of the Anti-British League could qualify to be further absorbed as members of the CPM only after they have acquired the class consciousness to fight for the liberation of all mankind and the lifelong strife for communism and upon appraisal of their strife. Are you aware of these statements? No.
No, but I am now.
Yes. Based on what he says, which of course you were not aware before, if what he says is accurate, ABL was a satellite organization of the CPM?
Could we scroll back up, please?
Sure.
Yes, the ABL was, which is, wait, sorry, what was the question?
Based on what he says, and if what he
Yes.
says is accurate, ABL was a satellite organization of the CPM. It's straightforward based on what he says.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's not controversial. Mr. Chairman, may I have a minute? I actually had a meeting at 4 o'clock. May I text the person I was supposed to meet to tell them
Sure.
that I'm still? Thank
Please
you.
proceed.
Thank
Dr.
you very
Thum, if
much.
it's very important, you need us also to confirm to whoever it is that you're indisposed at the moment.
Well, I did warn them in advance that
Thank you.
it
Thank you.
might take
So
a
let's
while.
carry on.
Yeah, thank you for
yes, let's
understanding. Please carry.
Let me show you another document. Now, Zhou Guang, Comrade D, whom you're aware of, correct?
That's, yes.
Yes.
Ng Ming Chiang.
Yes.
He has a number of aliases.
First anti-British League group in Singapore Chinese High School. He has written something in the mainstays of the anti-colonial movement, legendary figures of the Singapore People's Anti-British League. I assume you haven't read this either. This was in Mandarin.
It depends. I have read some articles in Mandarin, some memoirs, but
Okay.
not.
But this particular one you haven't read.
No, I don't think so. Do you have the title?
Well, it's the same book as the earlier book when I referred you to, what's his name now? Wong Sun Fong. But the title of the article, First Anti-British League Group in Singapore Chinese High School. The title of the book is Mainstays of the Anti-Colonial Movement, Legendary Figures of the Singapore People's Anti-British League in Mandarin.
Okay, thank you. No, I don't believe I've read that.
Thank you. Now, Comrade D, just to get this clear, was a member of the three-man CPM cell formed in 1957 to direct CPM activities in Singapore. You are aware of that?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, let's look at the English translation. Under the harsh underground conditions of the time, the ABL was set up precisely to meet the demands of strengthening the anti-British independence struggle, safeguarding the core leadership of the party, enlarging the organization of the party, and expanding its influence. To advance from ABL member to a CPM member, potential candidates have to go through different stages of stringent tests, and he sets out how they then become members. But essentially, the first paragraph, safeguarding the ABL was set up to meet the demands of strengthening the anti-British independence struggle, safeguarding the core leadership of the party, enlarging the organization of the party, and expanding its influence. If what Shougang says is correct, then again that simply confirms what Wong Sun Fong had said earlier, and ABL was a satellite organization. Correct?
Yes, the existence of the ABL is not controversial. It existed, it had members,
Thank you.
and it had many members, many of whom were not communists and others who were.
Right. Now, So, when I asked you earlier, and if necessary, later on, when we can, we will go back to the transcript. Remember, we started out this discussion, and we referred to page 5 of your ARI paper. And I read to you your statement that there is lack of evidence. It's clear that there is no evidence or lack of evidence of communism in the progressive left. And I said, by reference to what Mr. Lee had said, he referred to ABL, that you would include the ABL in your statement, and you said yes. That answer is not accurate. Would you agree?
Sorry, I was looking up what you're quoting. Could you repeat the question, please?
Look at the paragraph, the top paragraph in page 5 of your ARI
yes.
paper. See, the historiography is clear on the lack of evidence of communism.
Yes.
Remember, I asked you some questions when we first started out,
Yes.
and I said, this, you are referring to the progressive left, and then we went to identify which organizations were part of the progressive left that you are referring to.
And we had
And
a
I
very
took you through to what Mr. Lee had said,
right.
Barisan Socialist, ABL, trade unions, students' unions. And I said, so these would all be part of the progressive left that you consider.
Mm-hmm.
And in your view, there's no evidence. I mean, by putting those questions together, in your view, there's no evidence of communists in these organizations, based on the records you have seen.
Yes, there's no evidence of communism as in the special branch files, as I've said
I know.
repeatedly.
So now you see this evidence that contradicts what you said to us earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, ABL was a satellite organization set up to strengthen the core of the party and carry out its activities. Would you agree?
Yeah, sure, yes. Yes.
Thank you.
But I still feel there's no evidence of communism, right? We're clear on that, right?
Well,
Yep.
I don't know how you can say that in the face of what these two gentlemen have said, Wong Soon Fong and Shao Gang. One says it was set up precisely to safeguard the core leadership of the party and enlarging the organization of the party and expanding its influence. And Wong Soon Fong says underground organization in Singapore was the ABL, which they had access to. Mm-hmm. And Zhou Kang, Chonghua says that it was a peripheral underground organization led by the CPM to win over, and he says all those things. And I asked you, it was a satellite organization of the CPM, and you said yes. I mean, of course, you haven't seen this material before, but having looked at it, you were good enough to say it was a satellite organization of the CPM.
Yes, that's not controversial.
That's not controversial.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not controversial that there were communists within the ABL.
Nope.
And if so, I will just suggest to you that I will get the precise transcript later on, but your earlier answers given to me right at the beginning of this discussion on ABL were inaccurate.
Nope.
And
will I get a chance to explain, or are we just going yes, no still?
well, I think it's quite clear, and I don't think we want to keep going back to the same thing over and over again.
Can I just point out, since we're referring to what I said earlier, I did point out that the ABL, according to Special Branch, was completely pretty much useless right from the beginning. I have some quotes here from Special Branch documents, if you'd like me to read them into the record.
You can give it to us, but that still doesn't explain your answer earlier. And rather than arguing in vacuo, I'll show you the answers a bit later. Let's move on. Now, let's look at some additional material. This is interview given by Chin Peng to Professor Reed. Professor Reid, as you know, is a distinguished Australian scholar of Southeast Asia. You are aware of that?
Tony Reid is a friend, yes.
Yes. I didn't ask you whether he was a friend. I asked you
Yes.
whether he was a distinguished scholar.
Oh, yes, he's a very distinguished scholar.
Thank you.
Yes.
If you look at the discussion between Chin Peng and Professor Reid, so the so-called plan met with Lee Kuan Yew to explain, this is by reference to the 1957 attempt by the pro-communists, was not our party decision, not the superior's decision. That was a spontaneous move by the rank and file. Many of them are not party members. They are former ABL members. Anthony Reid, so you're saying that the party's policy right through to 1961 was to support Lee Kuan Yew. Chin Peng, yes. Was that a mistake when looking back on it? In our party, there are still some differences, so I can't give you any answer. We haven't resolved this. Can you tell us the reason why you thought it was a good policy to support Lee Kuan Yew? And then he gives an answer. And he approached us and so on. And we sent some members. That's why we sent some of our party members, some very close to our party, to help them, including Samad Ismail and the Indian Devan Nair. That's Chin Peng's account, and I don't think that's very controversial, correct?
No. So what?
And the PAP had
yes.
communists at Mr. Lee's own request, essentially.
Yes.
And Mr. Lee recalled this in his Battle for Merger talks in 1961. But I don't need to go through everything he said. But essentially, he said that he acted for someone who was released subsequently in 1953 from detention and became friends, and that was Samad Ismail. And he's still a most important communist cadre spreading propaganda on behalf of the communist cause. And then he came to know of Devan Nair, and they became comrades. And essentially, Chin Peng's account of how the PAP came to be formed, and Chin Peng's account was given in 2004, essentially is similar to Mr. Lee's account given more than 40 years earlier in 1961 on how the PAP came to be formed. Would you agree?
Similar, yes.
Thank you. From the CPM's perspective, the PAP was another open front organization to influence. Would you agree? It's fairly straightforward.
Another open front organization to influence. Yeah, sure, yes.
Thank you. Now let's look at some British records. 28th of August 1959, I'm sure you're aware of these. This is an Internal Security Council meeting. Paragraph 29. The chairman said the matter was crucial to the whole of the security situation. Experts' reports which he had been seeing suggested that post-events were repeating themselves. The same leaders were at work. There were the same building up in their strength, and they seemed to be getting into a position from which they could challenge the government's authority. In the past, this trend had been met by force. It was disturbing to see circumstances repeating themselves, with the horrid prospect of further force and bloodshed occurring. Would it not be wise to intervene now and crush the monster before it got too big? Why was not this right course now? You are aware of that?
Oh, am I aware of? Yes, of course.
Yes, of course.
This is, can I ask the exact date of this?
This was the 28th of August, 1959.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if, and this is the if, Chin Peng was right in what I had shown you earlier, that he could move the masses in Singapore, and the election victory in 1959 of the PAP was in a substantial measure due to the CPM's influence over the masses, then based on what the chairman of this Internal Security Council was saying, the threat was real, wasn't it? If Jinping was right.
The chairman said that this matter was crucial to the whole of the situation. The experts report that the post events were repeating themselves. The same leaders were at work. There was single strength and I'm sorry, what was the question?
If Jinping was right in what he has said in his book, that the CPM had influence over the masses in Singapore, and the PAP victory of 1959 was in a significant measure due to that influence. If that is correct, then what the chairman was saying here was a cause for concern. Would you agree?
If Jinping is right, then these are very disconnected. What the chairman is saying here.
It's not disconnected. Let me explain to you.
He doesn't use the word communist or communism in this paragraph.
Right.
I'm not sure what is exactly he's referring to.
Okay, what do you understand by that paragraph? Maybe you can tell us.
Singapore.
It must be, you must know this back of your hand. You say you've read all these records.
There were brothers together in the union.
Yeah. It's fairly straightforward, isn't it, what he says?
Hold on a second.
Not exactly. Let's go through sentence by sentence.
Okay.
The experts' reports which he had been seeing suggested that the past events were repeating themselves. The same leaders were at work. You understand that?
This is in reference to what exactly? The security situation?
Okay, let me ask you another question. Can I take it that you hadn't applied your mind to this document?
There are thousands of documents.
No, it's a question that I'm asking about an August 1959 document.
August 1959.
Can I take it that you haven't applied your mind?
Clarification. This document, is it it's an Internal Security Council
Yes.
minute, so the chairman is William Good.
Yes.
Yes, that's an interesting question because I'm not sure. I'm not sure they are, or rather, I haven't seen this. There's 4 or 5 council meetings where the minutes don't seem to be available. So, did you get this from the British Archive? If so, I would love to go through these. Or are they from Singapore?
Let me ask you this question.
Yes.
Do you recall reading this before?
This is, if it's ISC 1959, no. No, I don't think I have seen the minutes. I have not been able to locate the minutes for the first few Internal Security Council meetings. The declassified documents, as far as I can remember, start with Selkirk in February 1960.
Okay.
So if you can give me this and it changes the story, I would definitely embrace having a look at these documents.
So let's just read this first. Look, you know the period, you know what he is saying.
Yes.
If you wanted the context, if you look at para 28, there was no open conflict in SGEU between the communist and the anti-MCP elements. They were all brothers together in the union seeking the same ends. The conflict would not arise until the MCP supporters chose to use trade unions for their political ends. And then he says, matter was crucial, but to the whole security situation. Experts' reports, which he had been seeing, suggested that past events were repeating themselves and same leaders were at work. It's quite obvious to you, even reading it for the first time, what that means, correct?
appears to refer to the broader anti-colonial movement and revival of the anti-colonial movement against the British.
There was the same building up in their strength, and they seemed to be getting into a position from which they could challenge the government's authority. You can understand that, right?
Yes, the anti-colonial movement is
Right.
building up its strength after the election of the PAP.
And in the past, this trend had been met by force. It was disturbing to see circumstances repeating themselves with
Yes.
the horrid prospect of further force and bloodshed occurring.
Yes,
Now-
the force was from the British, the colonial government, which violently suppressed the anti-colonial movement.
Right. So in your view, this is the anti-colonial movement which had nothing to do with the communists, correct?
No, the communists were also anti-colonial.
Yes.
Right, like the vast
So
majority of the population
Then
was
let's
anti-colonial.
then stick to this. Would you agree that the building up of strength that is being referred to includes the building up of strength of the communists?
It was the stated policy of the communists to build up their strength.
Thank
sure.
you.
But whether he's referring to it here, I don't
Yes.
know. I'll need to see the full document. I would,
Right.
If you can release these documents, I would really appreciate it.
Let's look at this point which I made to you. In the context of what the chairman was saying, Sir William Good, if the leaders were building up, including the communists, and assuming the communists were using open front tactics, and assuming Chin Peng was right that they could move the masses.
Sorry, you're doing. I thought you were reading. Sorry,
No,
you're doing
assuming
hypotheticals.
that Chin Peng was
assuming.
right in moving the masses, then the threat of the communists moving to challenge the government using the masses and using these build-ups was real. If Chin Peng was correct, reading it in this context.
Again, you're asking me if yes,
Yes,
sure.
thank you. But you
again-
disagree with Chin Peng?
Well, evidence, special branch. We've
Thank
been
you.
over this. Yes, there is no evidence that
Yes.
the detainees of Coldstall were involved in any communist conspiracy.
Right. Now,
But I'm glad you
that's
accept
not
that.
the question. The question is about the CPM. If you want to make a separate point that those who detained under Operation Coldstall were not communists, that's a separate point. The point I'm focusing on was the communist underground in Singapore, their influence and their role, and if Chin Peng is right that they could move the masses, so much so to even win the elections for the PAP, then the chairman's concerns were serious and valid. It's a simple question.
The CPM did not have the power to move the masses.
Yeah,
We know
so
this,
I'm asking you if Chin Peng was correct.
but he's not.
Okay, but if he is correct, then the chairman's concerns are serious.
But he's not.
Right. But assume for the time being he is. Would you agree as a matter of logic?
Why assume in particular that Chin Peng
Right.
is
I
correct?
think the fact that you don't want to assume and
Because
answer
he's
the
not.
question, Dr. Thum, says a lot, but
yes,
let's
it does,
move on.
doesn't it?
Let's move on to March 1965. Manifesto of the Malayan National Liberation League, Central Committee. You know what the Malayan National Liberation League is, right?
Yes, yes.
Right. Look at I'll put the document up. That's the political wing of the CPM, wasn't it?
The political wing of the CPM? I think it was a bit broader than that.
What is it?
It's a collection of anti-colonial forces.
Would it include the communist forces?
Yes, yeah, sure.
Now, let's look at the language it uses.
Can I ask the date of this document?
The date of this document. I gave it to you, the 15th of March, 1965.
Right, thank you.
Have you seen this document before?
No, I don't believe I have. No.
All right. During the last few years, I'm trying to make sure that you will have the paragraph I want. Yeah, it's a fourth paragraph. During the last few years, inspired by the long and persistent armed struggle of the National Liberation Army, our people's struggle for genuine independence, democracy, peace, and the reunification of the Malay Peninsula with Singapore has made further headway, while the National Liberation Movement of the people of North Kalimantan has gained momentum and taken the course of armed struggle. Would you now agree that the MNLL is the political wing of the CPM? The language is obvious.
The language of anti-colonialism was common to many left-wing forces of the period. I don't think it's possible for me to conclude at this point, particularly since the document is dated March 1965, and my papers that you are referring to specifically cover 53 to 63.
So you do not know of 65?
We can have a separate discussion.
No, I'm asking you whether you know of the period after 63.
I have worked on the period after 63 in the context of Singapore's integration, its politics within Malaysia.
Right.
Because by that time, the Malayan Communist Party was not much of a factor in domestic politics.
Right. And looking at this document, you will not agree. Have you heard of the Malayan National Liberation League?
I've heard it referred to, yes.
Okay. Have you heard it referred to as the political wing of the CPM?
No.
And looking at it, language.
The language is common to anti-colonial left-wing movements throughout the region, indeed throughout the world. So it's impossible to say.
During the last few years, inspired by the long and persistent armed struggle of the National Liberation Army, what National Liberation Army were they referring to?
I assume the Malayan Communist Party.
Thank you. During the last few years, inspired by the long and persistent armed struggle of the National Liberation Army, our people's struggle for genuine independence, democracy, peace, and the reunification of the Malay Peninsula with Singapore has made further headway, while the National Liberation Movement of the people of North Kalimantan has gained momentum and taken the course of armed struggle. You would still deny that this is not on the face of it clear that it's a document referring to the communist liberation movement?
It's referring to the communist, to the
and
CPM,
the MNLL,
yes.
You would say, as far as you know, you have no reason to conclude that it's a political wing of the CPM.
I said it was more complicated than that. I think, if I recall correctly,
Okay,
there was a
let me
collection
then
of
phrase it.
anti-colonial forces.
Do you believe that it was linked to the CPM in any way?
I think I can't comment on that. That falls outside my area of expertise.
So you have no idea?
About the, what's it?
MNLL.
MNLL. I'm aware of it, but it is not part of my expertise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, you know, let me just show you what some things that some historians have said. If you look at the historians, Lee Ting Hui, Turnbull, Drysdale, Richard Clutterbuck, all of whom I assume you would be aware of,
Yes.
all referred to the,
Sorry, Drysdale is not a historian.
I stand corrected. All of them referred to the Malayan Communist Party, the United Front policy in the 1950s, and the influence that these United Front movements had on the ground.
And all of them published before the declassification
Right.
of British documents in 2013.
So you are aware of their writings, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, what the CPM leaders have said that we have looked at, starting with the Secretary General, if what they say is true, then there was a strong and powerful Communist United Front in Singapore, as confirmed by several scholars who have studied the matter. Though, as you point out, they did their work before the declassification. Okay, so put that in parentheses. We accept that their publications were before the declassification. But if you look at what the CPM leaders, not just the Secretary General, but starting with the Secretary General, but Fang Chuanpi and others have said, is corroborated by what these historians, as well as Drysdale, says about the powerful Communist United Movement Front in Singapore in the 1950s. Agree?
Again, Mr. Shanmugam, you start with if and assume that
Yes.
if they are correct.
Yes.
I said, and I've already given my position on that.
Right. So it is impossible for you to answer a question based on certain assumptions.
The assumption is as I point out, is heavily flawed.
Right. But we can see that on the face of it, the published records of historians coincide with what the communist leaders have said. Would you
So
at least agree?
Are you saying historians like Turnbull, Clutterbuck, and Lee Ting Hui?
Yes.
Well, you have not shown Turnbull or Clutterbuck, and Lee Ting Hui. We had that discussion where I pointed out the nuances of his.
Let me come back. I haven't shown you.
Okay.
I don't think I want to show you all of it. I assume you have read it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just saying to you, and you can disagree if you disagree,
Mm-hmm.
the works of Drysdale, Clutterbuck, Turnbull.
Sorry, Drysdale's not a historian.
You did make that point. I just now said the works.
Okay.
The
My
works of
apologies.
Richard Clutterbuck, Drysdale, Turnbull, and Lee Ting Hui corroborate, or let me not use the word corroborate. Their works are similar. What they say is similar to what the leaders of the CPM have said. Correct? Which I've shown you.
Clutterbuck works more on.
No, I mean,
the
first, can you
C-
agree or disagree, and then
Disagree.
You disagree.
Yes.
Explain why.
Okay, so Clutterbuck, I think his work focuses a lot more on the security dimensions of the MCP, and including north of the Causeway, and during the heights of the emergency, right? He does not focus specifically on the political aspects of Singapore's anti-colonial independence struggle.
Well, I
Mary
didn't.
Turnbull-
I didn't talk about that either.
But you're asking me whether they agree.
No,
And
I didn't say
I'm-
that. Okay, let me frame you this, please. The CPM leaders that we have seen say there was a large-scale. They had influence with the masses, and they could move the masses, and there were.
But they couldn't.
They had influence, and a number of activities were carried out with success using their communist cadres. The simple point to you is what these people say is similar in that there was a mass movement which was successful in organizing activities and inspired by the communists. It's a simple question. You can agree or disagree.
I disagree. That's not
Thank you.
what Mary says.
Right.
Sorry, Professor Turnbull.
Does any of them say that, in your view? Or none of them says that?
Oh, okay. So we have to take them individually and go
Right.
through exactly what they say.
I don't need for you to go through exactly what they say. You can take them individually and tell me whether you agree or disagree.
So your three clauses were mass movements, Then what was the second one? And the third one was inspired by the communists.
Yes.
What was the second clause?
Well, let's just make it easier for you. Mass
Okay.
movement inspired by the communists.
Mass movement, yes. Inspired by the communists. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean the communists controlled it? Does that mean the communists led it? Does it mean it was organized by the communists? Or does it mean that they were inspired by the example of the MCP as an anti-colonial, as a leading anti-colonial party, and also its resistance to the Japanese? So can I clarify inspired? What does that mean?
Over the years, spectacular mass movements were in the main led by basic level cadres of the Communist Party. Take that to be the definition.
Led by cadres, but not, so it does not include organized by the Communist Party. It does not include any sort of coordinated action by the Communist Party.
Not yet, yes, led by the cadres.
So it is possible that Communist Party, that communists and communist sympathizers and fellow travelers, and I mean, no, we know that, there were people in the anti-colonial movement who believed in communism. Yes.
I think, again, you have gotten out of answering the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the question again?
I'm sure you are well aware of the question. Well, let me ask you again. The CPM leaders say the mass movements were successful and were led by communist cadres.
And they're wrong.
Would you agree?
Well, I disagree, as I said.
No, I didn't ask. I haven't finished the question.
Oh, okay.
Would you agree?
You did say would I agree. Okay, sorry, my apologies.
What has been written by these gentlemen, and you can take them individually, says something similar. Each of them.
That,
First of all, let's take Lee Ting Hui.
yes.
What's your answer?
So does he say that the mass movements were inspired by the communists?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be a
Fair representation.
Yes, his book was published
What
in
about Turnbull?
1996. Turnbull, interestingly enough, backs away from that position. In her earlier work, she so it depends on which edition you're reading, but in her later work, In the Face of New Evidence, she backed significantly.
2009.
Yes, so yes. She
Among the
consulted
things
me
she
on
says,
that
Malayan Communist Party revived United Front policy in 1954, set out to infiltrate open organizations, notably Chinese schools and labor unions. ABL quickly expanded, numbering more than 2,000 members by 1954. That's, in summary, what she says. There are many other things she says.
They set out to do that, yes. And the ABL had, had significant numbers. Whether they were able to do anything with them, special
let's
branch
move on to
disagrees.
Drysdale.
I'd rather
What's your
not.
view?
Drysdale is not a historian, and his work is not historically
move on.
reliable.
What about Clutterbuck?
Clutterbuck, as I mentioned, is a security expert. And if I remember correctly, he focuses
He
very
says
much
party
on
structure under town committee in line with the main front organizations, trade unions, women's organizations, Democratic Youth League. Does that help you?
Sorry, repeat that?
Party
Please?
structure under town committee in line with the main front organizations. This is my summary of what he says. Trade unions, women's organizations, the Democratic Youth League. Does that help you?
So he's saying the party organization includes all these things?
He didn't say that.
Sorry, then I
says that
misunderstood you.
These are all infiltrated by the communists.
Infiltrated, in what year?
In the 1950s.
Well, again, it depends.
You are not aware of what he says? You haven't
I'm
read his
aware
book?
of what he said. You're summarizing what he's saying, right? But what part of the book are you reading in reference
Okay.
to? There's a lot of it.
Let's take post-1955.
Post 1955.
Yes.
There were communist cadres. Sorry, not cadres. There were communists in these organizations. Yes, we don't deny, but they were not part of some sort of structure, party structure,
So
reporting to anyone, or as far as we know, there's no evidence in the special branch
All right.
files of that.
So your point is the CPM had its cadres in all these places.
No. My point is that there were communists, not that they were CPM cadres, not that they were actively taking instructions from the CPM. You mentioned Wong Soon Fong, for example, and he actually went against CPM orders because he wasn't aware of them, which is one of the examples I use in my work, which points out that CPM issued orders and they were not followed by people that we know to be communists.
Right.
So, in fact, in many instances, they went directly against the communist instructions,
Right.
Including in 1961 with the PAP split, because there was the standing instruction at the time was.
Can we keep to the
maintaining-
question?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So let me come back. Your point is there are communists in all these organizations. They were involved in these mass actions. However, the CPM was not organizing them, and there was no open quote conspiracy, close quotes, correct?
Yeah, that seems reasonable, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And,
not to say that they were rife with communists. I'm saying there were, I'm
Right.
not saying like 90% of these organizations were communists. We know of, specifically 1, 2, 3 people here and there.
Yes.
Yes.
And at the same time, you're quite happy to agree to this statement. Over the years, the spectacular mass movements were in the main led by basic level cadres of the student committee. You're quite happy to agree to that statement. So I'll just suggest to you that you are finding every which way when you're confronted with something that you cannot disagree with, then you agree. Otherwise, you're finding every possible avenue to just stating what is obviously true. You can agree or disagree, and we'll move on.
Wait, are you asking me to agree or disagree to your accusation?
Well, it's a statement based on the record.
Based on the record, sorry.
Yes.
Then
I take it that you disagree. I'm just giving you an opportunity.
Okay, I disagree.
Thank you. Now,
I disagree with the assumption in your statement.
yes, I know you do.
Yes.
Now, the statement that the historiography, basically academic work or body of academic work, is clear on the lack of communism in the progressive left. That's your fundamental statement.
Yeah, I'm willing to stand by that, yes.
Now, for that, in order to come to that statement, to make that statement, you have ignored the first-hand accounts of the Secretary General of the CPM,
And I've explained why.
and you have ignored the evidence of Yu Chui Ip, Fong Chuan Pik,
And I've explained why.
as well as other ABL and CPM members. Correct?
I have taken them into account.
Yes.
Yes.
It doesn't appear in any of the footnotes in your ARI paper. As far as I can tell, it doesn't appear in other published works of yours.
Yes. They are in my thesis, though, I should note.
Well,
The thesis is in NUS library.
I know, but when you make publications, when you put out publications, the fact that as a historian you set yourself out to make certain statements and you never explain anywhere, first, that these exist, and second, why they ought not to be taken into account, would you say is a trifle odd?
No. You
Right.
can't possibly account for every single source that ever existed anywhere in a published work of 10,000 words, including citations.
Right.
You focus on making a
No.
coherent argument and proving your arguments. You don't prove negatives, right? You don't say, I disagree with this. That will spend thousands of words doing that.
Yes.
You make an argument about what you believe based on the evidence that you have, and you cite that evidence. And then other people, of course, then come and disagree with you.
Right.
You have a discussion.
So that's your approach to history.
Yes. Yeah, and that's how I was trained.
Right. And you will, if you find a source, various sources, CPM, Secretary General, others, because you disagree with them, you set them aside and you just rely on those that you think are relevant, and you make your arguments. That's the approach you take.
And if people challenge me on that, as you have, I am willing to explain why I set them aside. And if you feel that it's absolutely necessary, I'm happy to provide a written account of why I set each and every one of these pieces aside.
Well,
and the
we know
perspectives
that
I
some
use.
of them you haven't even read. I mean, you said that earlier.
I also know you haven't shown me a single special branch document, which is
Yes.
the most coherent
Well,
and largest archive of
I'm
data.
not claiming to be a historian of repute. I'm not a historian, and nor have I written on this period. And I'm simply asking you questions on your writings.
Yes.
Thank you. Now let's look at the standards of an objective historian, since you say you are trained in this way. You are aware of the David Irving, the Holocaust denier, correct?
Yes.
Yes. You can see where this is going.
Yes.
He sued Penguin Books and others for defamation on the ground that they impugned his standing as a historian. The case is Irving versus Penguin Books Limited. In the year 2000, it was reported. Regius Professor of Modern History of Cambridge, Professor Richard Evans, gave evidence. He set out what he considered to be generally accepted standards of historical scholarship. I'm sure none of this will be news to you. So he set out the following criteria. Does Irving give a reasonably accurate account of the documents he uses? Does he translate them in a reasonably accurate and unbiased manner? Does he take into account as many other relevant documents as any professional historian could reasonably be expected to read and cite when he is using one particular source to substantiate an argument? Does he apply consistent criteria of source criticism to all of the original material he uses, examining it for its internal consistency, its consistency with other documents, its provenance, the motives of those who are responsible for it, and the audience for which it was intended? Are his arguments, his statistics, and his accounts of historical events consistent across time and based on reliable historical evidence? Does he take into account the arguments and interpretations of other historians who have examined the same documents? Does he, in other words, advance his arguments and interpretations in a reasonably objective and unbiased manner? Would you accept that those are the standards of a competent historian? Expected of a competent historian?
Sure.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Sorry, yes.
The judge says in his judgment, an objective historian is obliged to be even-handed in his approach to historical evidence. He cannot pick and choose without adequate reason. So in the face of this, can I suggest to you, the fact that your historiography, you say there is no evidence. That's what you say in the ARI paper, and you repeat that in multiple other places. You say there is no evidence of any communism in the progressive left. And in saying that, you ignore the first-hand accounts of the Secretary General of the CPM.
And I've explained why.
You ignore Yu Chu-yip.
I've explained why.
You ignore Fang Chuan-pik and countless other ABL and CPM members. And if you go back to what Professor Evans says, you may think them unreliable, but anyone reading your document would not even know they've said these things. Because you say there is no evidence. A proper, competent historian would, when he makes such a sweeping statement, there is no evidence, will say, the number one man in the organization does say things which are contradicted by me, but I disagree with him for this reason. I disagree with the number one man in Singapore was controlling operations from Riau. I disagree with the number one man who was in Singapore directing operations. And I disagree with all of them for these reasons. Then people can assess whether you are being accurate or not. The Regius professor says, does he take into account as many other relevant documents as any professional historian could reasonably be expected to read and cite? You haven't even read some of the documents, and you haven't cited any of them. You would be expected to set them out, at least in a footnote, but actually more than that when you're dealing with the Secretary General, and explain yourself.
May I speak
Yes.
now? Yes. If I refer you to footnote 7 of my paper,
Yes.
right, I list out the previous historiography, and
Yes.
I conduct a very brief historiographical review.
Yes.
Now, according to conventions of the history of historical writing, that it is assumed that you will read all those other sources and you are responding to all those other sources and you're setting yourself in the context of the broader historiography, in which, and in many of those books, the relevant documents that you've cited, including Chin Ping, Yu Choi Yip, Fang Chuan Pi, have been cited. They're part of the broader historiography of which my paper is responding to. So there really is no need to cite things which are not part of my central argument. In citing this historiography, that is assumed, right? And this paper and my other papers, as I pointed out, have been passed by juries of my peers, either my thesis through my thesis committee or this through peer review. Other historians have looked through my work. Historians who are familiar with the period have read many of those sources. Some of them are cited here who have written books, and they have found my work to be solid. And thus far, no historian has come out and openly, not openly, no historian has contradicted the central thrust of my work. Now, one would assume if my work was inaccurate or if I neglected to include any sources, there would be some sort of bad peer review, there would be accusations, there would be, my professional standing would be affected, but that has not happened, and this was published some years ago now, 2013, I think it was?
Yes.
Yes.
Dr.
So,
Thum, are you
yeah.
saying that no one has contradicted you in your statements?
My central argument, there is the subjective interpretation of facts is something which I have had vigorous debates with other historians about. But central facts that I have put forward have not been...
Are you suggesting that the argument that there's no evidence of communism in the progressive left is not central to your case?
The central argument that there's no evidence of communism.
It is the central
Yes.
argument of your position, isn't it?
Of this? No, it's not central. I think I have a much more central argument.
But it's essential.
It is a summary
to your point.
of my argument.
Yeah, it is the summary of your main point.
I disagree. It's not the summary.
Okay. Now, you have to, it's a foundational block, as it were, because
Sure.
you have to, okay, that's fine. Now, all of these that you cite in footnote 7, and somebody has done an analysis of them, are you saying that they have analyzed the records that I've shown you and have critiqued them and have dismissed them?
I'm saying that
Now,
historians...
please answer the question. Footnote 7, all of that you've cited, are you saying that they've analyzed the statements I put to you?
Not all the sources you've put to me. For example, the one by footprints, I think that came out the same year as my paper or after. So obviously I couldn't have included that. But definitely Chin Ping, Fang Chuan Pi, and Yu Choi Yip.
And the statements I've made from their book and the different chapters, they have been critiqued by these people?
I've critiqued them. I just critiqued them, and I'm sure they've been
you have just
by...
critiqued them. That's
Yes.
not the point. I'm asking you whether
They
these
have been
people...
critiqued by historians, yes.
No, please. Footnote 7. These people, you say, have they critiqued the different passages that I've put to you from...
The exact passages?
Yes.
Well, I can't recall that. There's thousands of words there. How am I supposed to recall exact passages off the top of my head?
And you are not aware, are you suggesting they have critiqued what Fang Chuanpi said, the passage I quoted to you?
Well, again, these are literally millions of words,
Yes. Except that the passages I quoted to you are directly relevant to the points you make.
Yes, but I have explained why Chin Peng and Fang Chuanpi are problematic
please,
sources.
Dr. Thum, let me finish. I've asked you why you haven't referred to them and dealt with them. And your point is, well, others have dealt with them. And look at footnote 7. So now I'm asking you whether they have dealt with these points. And your answer is, how can I know?
I'm sure they've dealt with these points.
But you're not sure.
Well, I can't recall everything with 100% accuracy.
Right.
But it is part of the historiography.
All right.
Yes.
Well, I think that says a lot.
Yes, it does, doesn't it?
I'm suggesting to you, based on what you have said to us, what we have seen is not scholarship but sophistry. You can agree or disagree.
Not only do I disagree, I object to this allegation against my professional, ability.
We will come to a little bit more in the documents. Let's look at Mr. Lim Chin Siong now. You say he was never a communist. Now, let me state this for the record. He was a man of tremendous courage. He was held in the highest regard by Mr. Lee.
Sorry, are you quoting me when I said he was never a communist?
I said you say. Your position is that he was never a communist.
I have published a whole article about Chin Siong, about what he is, and there is no doubt that communism was highly influential, but I argue he is a socialist, a Malayan socialist.
So he was not a communist, he was not a member of the CPM, correct?
There's no evidence that he was a member of the CPM.
Right.
Beyond hearsay, of course.
Yes. Now, so Mr. Lim, I accept, man of tremendous courage. He was held in the highest regard, as you know, by Mr. Lee and many of his colleagues. He strongly believed in certain principles and fought with all his power for them. So the question is, what are those beliefs and principles? Let's look at this interview with Mr. Lim Chin Siong, which I'm sure you're aware of, the 1996 interview with Melanie Chu.
Yes.
The interviewer is Melanie Chu. Then after the war, you came to Singapore. You went to the Catholic High and then Chinese High, and according to Special Branch report, you became involved in ABL. Is this true? Answer, yes, it is true. Can you tell me how you joined the ABL? He says a nationalist must join ABL. What else was there? And then you are aware, of course, of Mr. Lee's battle for merger and the handwriting documentary evidence that he put out, including the notes.
Yes.
And Mr. Lee's statement that they are among several documents that Lim wrote in 1953-54 for the archives of the CPM and for the instruction of recruits to the Communist Party. And then 2003, Fong Chong Pik. I quote, Lim Chin Siong and I did have a definitely not normal association. I can never forget Lim Chin Siong's courage and determination to be the first to stand on the front line, knowingly doing what had seemed impossible. Of course, Lim Chin Siong was the left wing's most important person. After the appearance of the plan, he remained the most important left-wing person, one with even greater influence and authorities. During key moments in the struggle for independence, Lim Chin Siong and I had a relationship as fellow workers. Now, the most important left-wing person, a person with whom I had a special acquaintance, fellow workers, standing in the front line doing what had seemed impossible. Let's try and do this quickly. It's obvious that based on what Fang Chong Pik says, the inference is irresistible that he's saying he's a communist and a CPM member.
I don't see that anywhere.
Okay. And then let's look at what Chin Peng says. I cannot with any degree of accuracy place a figure and so on. We have seen that. Sorry, I think I may have gotten the wrong reference. Okay, I'm sorry, I will have to come back to this. The Chang Tai-yong 2013, which I think you haven't read.
Sorry, Professor Tan Tai-yong's book?
No. Zhang, Z-H-A-Z-H-A-N-G, Zhang Tai-yong.
Yes.
2013, we talked about it earlier, and I think you said you haven't read it.
No.
After being expelled from school for participating in an examination boycott at the end of 1951, Chen Seong continued his studies at an English stream school, but later accepted the organization's decision and devoted himself to trade union movement and constitutional struggle, becoming a shining star in the history of independence, democratic, and trade union movements in Singapore.
Yes.
Now, according to Lee Yue-sun, Chin Seong was apprehensive about the organization's decision at first, as he was afraid that he would not be able to take up the heavy responsibility. Which organization do you think he is referring to?
Is there, does he...
I'm just asking you, based on your knowledge, which organization do you think he's referring to?
Well, Chin Seong was an ABL member at this time, so potentially the ABL.
So you think it's a ABL's decision? ABL is what he's referring to?
Well, I can't say because the ABL, of course, has been shown to have been hugely ineffective. I'm not sure what source he's relying on as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I told you who Chang Tai-yong was, but we leave your answer at that.
Okay.
Chang Tai-yong...
Can I just point out the line constitutional struggle? Everything Chin Seong did was legal.
Yes,
Yes,
I know you're
we
keen
accept
to
that.
say that. Let's look at
And I'm glad we
Chang
agree on
Tai-yong.
that.
Pardon?
Oh, I'm glad we agree on that.
No.
That it says
I said I'm keen to say. I'm keen.
Yes. But
I know that you are
it says
keen to say that.
constitutional struggle. Yes.
Well, it says a few other things too.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's look at Aloysius Chin, 1994.
Sorry, 1994?
Yes,
Oh,
1994.
That precedes any of the declassified
I know,
British.
but
Okay.
you have read it?
I'm familiar, yes.
Yes. 1994. Lim Chin Seong's involvement in the CPM has also been confirmed by CPM leaders Siu Cheong and Ah Hoi. They cited Lim as an example of a CPM member who was deployed in open front activities in political parties. Lim Chin Seong was chosen because he was considered a very important CPM member who had excellent qualities as a CUF cadre, namely dedication, trustworthiness, and moreover, he had been involved in CPM activities since his school days. You are aware of this passage?
Yes, yes, I am.
You have, and correct me, I haven't looked at everything you've written. Have you referred to this? What?
I have
Aloysius
referred to a collection of passages. Rather than refer to just this passage,
Right.
I have pointed out that there's no evidence that Chin Seong was ever a member of the Malayan Communist Party,
Right.
nor involved in any communist conspiracy.
Do you know who
to
Aloysius Chin relies on for this?
Do refresh my memory. I don't see the citation here.
Okay, he is referring to Sui Chong and Ah Hoi, who are senior CPM cadres. Is that relevant?
Who are Sui Chong and Ah Hoi?
Well-
are they in the special branch ISD documents?
Have you done any research on them?
He can say their names, but they're people with many, many aliases.
No, I've asked you a simple question. Have you done any research on Sui Chong and Ahoy?
It's possible I have because they're aliases, right? They could be any one
Have
of
you
a number.
come to the
of-
conclusion that they are not telling the truth?
I don't think that that this is accurate. Yes.
No, the question I asked you is, have you done any research?
It's possible that I have, yes.
But
Because
you
they're
don't,
aliases.
you can't be sure.
I can't be sure, yeah.
You will let us know whether, after checking, whether you in fact did any research.
Well, I have done research.
No, on this point.
On this point, yes, of course I have done research on this point.
That Sui Chong and Ahoy, whether they're telling the truth. You have interrogated the passage, to use your phrase.
I have, as I've said, I have interrogated whether Chin Siong is or isn't a
wasn't the
member of the
question.
Communist Party.
Aloysius refers to specific names, and he says they
Yes.
are CPM cadres.
May I see the citation?
I'm just going to give you this, and then I leave it to you. Okay.
Well, if there's no citation, I can't respond to it as a historian.
I'm asking you what you have done and what you haven't done. You've said you've read this.
Yes.
Right. He refers to CPM leaders Siu Chong and Ahoy. I'm asking you whether you're, first of all, you're aware of this passage.
Yes.
The question is whether did you follow up and check on this further?
There's no citation. It's not possible to follow up and
Okay,
check.
so
if
the
there's no
answer is
citation.
I didn't do so because there was no citation. Is that correct?
It's impossible to verify.
Thank
yes.
you. Right. So do you cite this anywhere and say, well, you know, senior CPM leaders are said to have confirmed, but it's not possible to verify?
Rather than explain why other people are wrong, I have spent my articles
No,
explaining
no,
my
no, no,
argument.
no, it's not. You don't know whether they are right or wrong. You just can't verify.
Yeah, we can't verify. Yes. Okay.
If Aloysius had spoken with them, and it's based on that if,
If
then would that be relevant?
I suppose if again we're going to ifs, I'd rather
Right.
go into what we have facts
Yes.
about, evidence.
Right.
Evidence.
And it didn't strike you, okay, what is Aloysius' basis for saying this? He is referring to them as senior CPM cadres. Should I not go and try and find out a little bit more? It didn't strike you to do any of that.
I have evidence from the CPM itself, right? These two possibly were part of that. Could be anyone. Aliases make it very difficult to
All right.
trace.
So you will let us know whether you actually interrogated this passage.
I will. I'll let you.
Thank
know.
you.
Thank you.
Interrogated also in particular whether you did any research or work on checking up on why Aloysius refers to Siu Chong and Ahoy. Okay. Now, if you look at what Chin Siong says about, what Chin Ping says about Chin Siong, this was a passage that I was looking for just now, page 438,
Yes.
which
We
I'm
have,
sure you're aware of.
For the record, I've been over why Jinping is not a reliable
I understand.
source. Yes.
So I just want to get your answer. 438, the plebiscite was Lee's bid to legitimize his policy of joining Malaysia. The
So
opposition,
we don't have this on the. Oh, thank you.
there it is. The opposition Barisan Socialist Party stood firm against the idea. Contrary to the countless allegations made over the years by Singapore leaders, academics, and Western press, we never controlled the Barisan Socialists. We certainly influenced them. But neither Dr. Lee Siu Cho, the party chief, nor, as I understand it, other prominent opposition figures like Puducherry brothers, James and Dominic, had ever been CPM members. Nor had we ever been able to control them. Unquestionably, we tried as we did with many other aspiring politicians of the time. Do you think it is significant that he doesn't mention Mr. Lim Chin Siong? I'm just asking you a question. If you think it is not significant, we can leave it and move
Mr.
on.
Lim Chin Siong was the Secretary General of the Barisan Socialists.
Right. He
correct?
mentions
Yes.
so many other people. He doesn't mention Lim Chin Siong.
And he
He
says we
mentions
never
Lee Siew Chow.
controlled
He
the...
mentions James and Dominic Puducherry.
He doesn't mention Lee Kuan Yew. He
Yes.
doesn't mention
Lee Kuan Yew
any of
wasn't
us.
wasn't in the Barisan Socialist, and he mentions Lee Kuan Yew elsewhere as to what deal he did. I'm simply asking you whether
I'm
you
sorry,
think it
this is grasping at straws. The fact that he doesn't mention Lim
Dr.
Chin
Thum, I
Siong.
don't need your characterization. Please.
You've been characterizing my
I'm asking you a
my
question.
statements.
Do you think it is significant that Chin Ping doesn't mention Lim Chin Siong, the Secretary General, when he mentions all the others? If you think it's not significant, or if you think whatever Chin Ping says is irrelevant, we'll move on.
I have never said that everything that Chin Ping says is irrelevant, but yes, I don't think it's significant.
Thank you.